Thank you very much. Taoiseach, I stand before you today a proud veteran of the Irish Defence Forces. Taoiseach, every officer, NCO and service person of the Defence Forces, serving and retired, I've engaged with since the publication of the report, has expressed a welcome for the statutory inquiry and for any Garda investigation of wrongdoing in the Defence Forces. All expressed strongly that any wrongdoing should face the full rigours of the law. Taoiseach, page 10 of the IRG report clearly states that the IRGDF did not partake in fact-finding with any individual participant, yet you accepted the findings of the report unequivocally as fact and expressed the view that you were going to deliver cultural change in the Defence Forces. I hope you read more than the executive summary and did a detailed analysis of the appendices as well. If you had, you may not be so certain of the findings and your condemnation of the Defence Forces. You have described the findings as outlined in the report as very troubling, and you used the word disgusting to describe them. Findings like overt preference of masculine culture, overemphasis of physical fitness, misogynist, little tolerance for women. Where did these findings come from? Where is the basis of fact in this report? The judge listened to unacceptable lived experience of individuals, but none of these lived experiences were examined or interrogated to establish fact. Yet they are presented as fact. The judge made sweeping generalisations using the extreme and unproven lived experience to cast grave allegations against the entire Defence Forces. Where is the fact in the report? Where is the evidence to support the findings? The report was thrown a cloud over the members, past and present, where the judge simply became judge, jury and executioner. The report would not stand the test of any academic assessment, and the report methodology used would not support any findings. The findings are not fact, but generalisations. The proud history of the most loyal citizens of the state have been undermined by generalisations and not fact. All jumped on the bandwagon. For what reason? Maybe because they knew the Defence Forces cannot publicly comment to defend themselves, or are unable to speak openly to the press. Now we have a Defence Forces unable to defend themselves and unable to defend Ireland. Taoiseach, can I ask you, did the Department of Defence advise you that the report was built on generalisations and point out the damage that could be caused to the Defence Forces by this opinionated report? It clearly looks as if not. Even the Department of Defence, who speak publicly, are unwilling to defend the Defence Forces. Let's talk about resistance to change in the Defence Forces. How many reorganisations have governments imposed on the Defence Forces in the last 20 years? Reorganisations driven by budgetary concerns and often against the advice of the military. Every reorganisation was delivered effectively with no resistance once government decision was made. Taoiseach, government employed a third Assistant Secretary-General in 2017 for the Department of Defence. The post was Assistant General Secretary capability. This role, we were told, was to deliver HR change in the Defence Forces. How many HR initiatives did the person appointed bring forward? Can anyone name one that the Defence Forces refused to implement? In fact, I would question if any were brought forward at all. Yet the judge rubbished the HR policies. Is that your department's fault, or is it the fault of the Defence Forces? Look at the Independent Monitoring Group, which was established in 2001 following my colleague Senator Clonan's report. Is it not the case that every one of this group's findings were implemented by the Defence Forces? Where does the judge see resistance to change? The recent intervention in the media by the first Ombudsman for the Defence Forces, Barrister Pauline Marion Quinn, shows the success of the Independent Monitoring Group within the Defence Forces as best in class. The Independent Monitoring Group was shut down by your department in 2014 when it was doing an excellent job. Why? Taoiseach, you as Minister for Defence put our Defence Force in harm's way every day. It's part of your job. The report stated too much emphasis on physical fitness. The Defence Forces faces potential life-threatening situations every day. There may be requirements to use lethal force to protect themselves, or indeed refugees in camps in Africa, or Irish citizens being evacuated from Sudan. Soldiers need to be fit, strong and resilient, and I make no apology, and no one should. ever make an apology for this. The Defence Force training reflects these realities. Reference is made to the fact that the Defence Forces does not place an overemphasis on education. Yet the truth is the Defence Forces is probably the only organisation in the state, certainly the first, to recognise the benefits of lifelong learning and accreditation. The level of primary and secondary degrees, qualified soldiers, NCOs and officers is nothing short of impressive, something often adverted to by those military I meet overseas. Taoiseach, these are easily ascertained facts. Regarding the culture in the Defence Forces, there is no doubt that among HR professionals who are subject matter experts in organisational culture and how you assess organisational cultures, findings in this report of such extreme view could not possibly be arrived at from any true representative culture independent survey. I question, was there an empirical survey carried out, as there is zero evidence that one was conducted. The report took input that was unquestioned and untested from a very small representative sample of those who alleged rape, sexual harassment, or who felt they were unfairly treated, and based the report analysis on that. How did you or the department not recognise the shortcomings in the report before accepting its totality and condemning the Defence Forces? The same position exists in Defence Force leadership. The judge did not in any way reflect the excellent comprehensive leadership training in the Defence Forces. Suggestion that the leadership is dishonest and untruthful is simply a scurrilous comment and has no basis in fact. How can any credible report describe officers and NCOs as akin to characters in a Marvel film? Where's the credibility and unreasonable ramblings? The report refers to elitism. You attended the recent commissioning at Collins Barracks. The young men and women commissioned were totally representative of Irish society. A number were sons and daughters of enlisted personnel. From the biographies I read on that day, none were the product of the private colleges or the elite schools in this country. These are the future of the Defence Forces, and I see nothing elite about them. Taoiseach, you must move quickly to set up the statutory inquiry, and I'm glad you've confirmed that today. It must run in parallel with the Garda inquiry. Together with the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Sean Clancy, and Secretary General Jackie McCrum, we must ensure that the bullies and those involved in inappropriate sexual behaviour are rooted out and face the law. Finally, as it's clear that the Department of Defence itself has many questions to answer, I believe the independent oversight body must be totally independent of those serving in the Defence Forces and the Department of Defence, reporting only to you. Clearly, it would be wrong to include the Secretary General of the Department of Defence, albeit she's relatively new in the job, as this post gives out the wrong signal to those who are serving and those that are retired. I compliment you for the work you're about to do. I am deeply, deeply hurt, like so many of my colleagues who served, that we have all been tarred with the one brush. A simple sentence would have sufficed for the report, saying that I found prima facie evidence that would require a statutory inquiry. Instead of that, we have a report that has tarred the whole goddamn lot of us as sexual predators and bullies. I'm proud of the service I give to my country, as are the thousands of men and women who contact me. Hundreds of them have contacted me in recent days. Deeply, deeply hurt by this report. Thank you, Taoiseach.
Thank you.
I thank all the senators for your contributions. Tommy Fiachtív ní an áras ach go tuairascáil den scáiltá going an seo agus go méid daithionachar I mthuairim féin ag an tuairascáil seo óglaigh na hÉirden sna blianta tá roing. Agus táim a bhuíoch don brethebh as ach don céchol cuimse agus atá an tuairascáil agus Clachtan atá le fála a going go léir a seo amach. Just want to take a number of key issues, I think, and I won't go to every individual senator, but I'll try and bring you all together. I think Senator McGee made the point. First of all of you have saluting the courage of those who came forward, and I think you used the phrase that for individual women to tell their experience is a very traumatic thing to do, and we should always be mindful of that. I'm very conscious of that. I think all of you have articulated that. That's true to Women for Honour, the Women and Men of Honour, and also the current women's defence network within the Department of Defence, which the Secretary-General established. It's a very good forum as well. And I would say, and I listened to Senator Craughwell in particular, and in fairness, we do need all perspectives on this, and people need to have the ability to stand up and say freely what they think. But I genuinely say this with respect, denial is not an option here. And I understand, and many people have said they feel hurt. That is true.
I didn't deny the
I'm not saying you, no, I mean this generally, I'm not saying you're saying that.
statutory inquiry.
Just let me come back. And the reason I say it is because I did what you said, and I actually read the report myself. I don't have to depend on advice from officials on how I assess a report like this, and I've been through quite a number of inquiries from my earliest days in education when I brought in the first ever inquiry into religious institutions, industrial schools. And there's a considerable trauma involved in people coming forward. That's the first thing. So people don't come forward lightly. And I think to look at this numerically and saying how many actually came forward, and then you can do that and then say as a representative sample of the entirety of the work of those employed, it seems small. But if you look at raise a concern, which Minister Coveney had established at the same time as establishing the independent review, the Defence Forces themselves did their own survey around bullying complaints and sexual assault. They all align. They all align. You know, so if you were to sort of just look exclusively at the report, you might come to some conclusions that you came to. And in fairness to the report, you're correct. The report says it's not a fact-finding report. It equally says that the vast majority of serving members are upright, honourable people who want to serve their country. And it's in the interest of those, really, that we have to get this right. And yes, a statutory inquiry does now create the framework, the basis for really going further than the independent review group's conclusions and to interrogate these issues comprehensively without fear or favour. But I met raise a concern myself, having read the report. They're very clear. You know, there's a systemic issue here, and it's right now. It's not just historic. I met all the members of the independent review group. Some of those members of the Secretariat, who had no experience of any of this, said they've never come across anything like this in their lives, in terms of the experiences that were related to them that came before them. And I then would make the point as well that we have to be very clear as well, and there is a temptation, and some of the representative groups might say, oh, if we had resources. This is not about resources. This is about culture. On another day, we can debate resources. And paying conditions have improved, particularly for those coming out of Leaving Certificate. It's above most other entry levels now. This is about culture and how people feel and work within the service, or in the Defence Forces. And because if we keep sort of saying, well, it's about if we do something with the barracks or we do whatever, that this will all disappear. It won't. And I actually think myself, if I'm honest, and I might be wrong here, but my own sense is the culture, as it's revealed in this report, is very much part and parcel of the recruitment and the retention issue. And I think the retention issue is related to this. I think there are issues, and people raise the issue about training, and you made a point about, and I've raised this with my military advisors, as the Act would say, the senior member of the management. I think we need to, and with existing members as well, and we've heard the phrase that training is about how fast can you run and how much can you carry as you run. And it is a survival course almost, and I'm very conscious of what Senator Kine said. And there's a balance somewhere to be struck here. I mean, I read Karina Malloy's book. The whole training is about survival. And it's about, you don't complain, you must make it. And I come from a different culture, from an education perspective, where the culture is affirmation, where the culture is, okay, that person is nearly 70% there, how do we get to the person to the 90%? Or if the person's at 50%, how do they get the person to 60% and 70%? And I spoke to a few recruits recently, and I need to be careful because I've toured all the barracks, and once they get through it, they're happy with it. Because that's part of the culture, And someone who doesn't come through it, maybe that's telling us something they really aren't fit. Now, I've said to the military chiefs, I'll be straight up and I say it to anyone here, if I have a genius who's a genius in cybersecurity, and if the person's fairly unfit, I think we should find a way that person becomes a member of the Defence Forces. Because he might be far more, or she, might be far more damn useful, given the threats we're currently facing, than whether they can do 150 laps of Crow Park. I mean, I'm being a bit facetious, but like, sometimes it's about what are the threats? What are the challenges? We need versatility, we need flexibility, we need to, well, in all walks of life now, it's the multidisciplinary approach is the key. Why are people recruiting lots of people out of the defence? I agree with Senator Craughwell in one respect. There's a lot of education in the Defence Forces. Huge commitment to learning. I was down in Conn's Barracks recently. I mean, the expertise on ordnance, the expertise in all that area is fantastic. And drone technology in one respect and so on. And people are looking for them then, you know, in terms of recruitment. But we need to attract in different expertise, brain power, so that you have a real versatile array of resources, human resource, available to you. And I've made this point with respect to the Navy, that they did some direct entry competitions, but you still have to do your physical stuff and all the rest of it. And I'm saying, look, if we need someone to make sure the ships operate, in terms of capability and engines and radar or whatever, and technical, let's bring them in as civilians if we have to. So we have to keep, and just balance, and I'm prepared to listen back, you know, because people who have experience in the Defence Force as well, I'm prepared to hear all of that. But we are facing different challenges, and our training and all of that have to reflect that as well. And I think the criminal justice system, as has been identified, I think that there's a welcome for that now, and I think there's a broad acceptance that sexual assault complaints, or sorry, allegations must go to the Gardaí. And again, we would take guidance in respect of overseas. The Working Time Directive, I'm committed to getting that done. And I've set timelines to my officials in terms of concluding the talks that are underway in the conciliation schemes with the representative bodies, that I want that brought to a conclusion. That's important in cultural terms as well, and making it more attractive in terms of the workplace. There's a lot of investment going into the barracks now, Senators, as well, in terms of, and I take the point when I stopped the demolition of those houses, and I said I want them refurbished. There's a housing crisis after all, but I think there is an opportunity to create opportunities for members of the Defence Force, particularly younger members coming in for accommodation over a period of time where they can save, and that all helps then and contributes to their disposable resources and income and so on like that. But I think with the gym facilities in Kilkenny, for example, was incredible. It's a fantastic facility. Likewise, in other camps have good PE facilities. We want that uniformly across all facilities. Proper canteens and so on like that, where people can dine properly, and to improve the conditions within the barracks. But there's a significant, I mean, in Hall Bolan, tremendous investment there in the accommodation, and in the restoration of those older historic buildings on Hall Bolan itself. And we need to continue that investment, and also investment in capability. But fundamentally, and there's one point while on the oversight body, and I think it's unfair what has been said in respect of the Secretary General of the Department. I know it's not personal, it relates to the position. But any understanding of how government operates in terms of its administrative capacity, it seems to me that the oversight body requires that link to make sure that the accountability is performed, so to speak. Otherwise, I'm not clear how an oversight body that has no link in to the department. I mean, it's the IRG recommended that the Secretary General would be on the oversight body, not on the inquiry, obviously. It's going to be led by an independent judge. And the Department of Defence will come within the terms of reference of the inquiry. And there's numerous reports back saying all of these issues were being dealt with, by the way. And that's why it was, in the end, in terms of the IMG, that the option went for an IRG review by the Secretary General and by my predecessor, Simon Cook. Let's do the independent review group. Because I think there's a sense, and maybe the statutory inquiry can look into this, that the independent monitoring group was doing its reviews, but it wasn't happening on the ground. Or maybe people were being told stuff. I mean, one very telling comment was made to me by serving members, and it's this, that there is no point in having strategic review after strategic review, or policy documents or policy frameworks, if people on the ground in the Defence Forces do not see it in front of them happening, if they don't experience it. That is the litmus test now of all of this. People serving on the ground must see this change, must witness the transformation in culture. That would, for me, is the litmus test of what we're about to do. Because it's easy. The easy bit is the strategic frameworks and the policy documents, and we'll all sign off on them. But people on the ground must see it, happening. I think I've dealt with most of the issues that have been raised. Again, I would stress that it's not just the report itself that is bringing this. You know, I mentioned raise a concern. I've mentioned the Department or the Defence Forces' own survey. I've mentioned people I've met who are serving. I've met people who've retired, who kind of acknowledged why didn't I speak up, who kind of felt the culture was there. But also, like the Mohan report and the Meehan report, they're all symptomatic of delay in not getting on top of something very early on, reporting back. If you look at the length of timeline alone on the Mohan report, it's just too long, and so on. So I leave it at that. And you know, we want. I finished with Senator Craughwell. I was at a debt school recently, the one you were at. It was very refreshing that so many young people have dedicated their lives to the protection of the state and to serve the state and its defence forces. So we owe it to them. But as I said to them in my speech, the challenge for them is to become the leaders of this change, to be the generation that does things differently. Our job is to equip them and to enable them to do the job differently.
Thanks.